She was crouched beneath a bridge in the dead of winter, 9 children huddled around her, soaked to the bone and too cold to cry. The snow pooled at her knees, and above them, the sky hung flat and heavy like iron, promising nothing but more of the same brutal cold. These weren't her circumstances by choice. Life had stripped everything away piece by piece until she found herself here, beneath this forgotten bridge, with nothing left to pray for and no voice left to ask for help. But what happened next would change everything. Because sometimes salvation doesn't come from the places you expect, and sometimes the most broken people are the ones who build the strongest foundations. This is the story of how one key, one choice, and one quiet man turned desperation into something that would last generations. The woman had stopped praying the night before. Not because she'd lost faith exactly, but because her words just seemed to fall flat into the emptiness around her. She wrapped her arms around the youngest child, pressing him against her ribs, but the cold moved through them all the same. Her fingers had gone blue at the knuckles. Behind her, the baby stirred with a soft gasp that pulled at something deep in her chest. She pressed her cracked lips to his forehead, still warm for now, clinging to that small mercy. When a wagon passed overhead, she didn't look up. She had no more explanations for the strangers who slowed, stared, and then kept moving. They always kept moving. She wasn't asking anymore because asking required hope, and hope had become a luxury she couldn't afford. Then boots came down the slope, slow and measured. She heard them but didn't move. Let it be a lawman come to run them off. Let it be nothing at all. She had nothing left to defend and no voice left to use. The man stopped just out of reach, and his voice cut through the silence like gravel under boots. "You need somewhere dry," he said. She turned her head. He stood there in a long coat, hat pulled low, a thick scarf at his throat. His eyes were pale, not cold but not soft either, the kind of eyes that had seen enough to understand without needing explanation. He told her about a cabin up north, not much to look at but with wood and food and room enough. When she stiffened, he added something crucial. "Not charity," he said. "Just not right to leave you here." She didn't answer because words felt too heavy. Her legs trembled when she tried to stand, and one of the older boys helped her up with small but insistent hands. The man watched without judgment, then told them they could ride in the wagon, her and the little ones, while the rest followed on foot. Then he did something unexpected. He reached into his coat and pulled out a key, heavy iron worn smooth at the teeth from years of use. "You don't have to say yes now," he said, holding it out to her. "But take this if you want to use it." When her fingers brushed his for just a second, ice against warmth, it made her flinch. The wind picked up sharp and sudden. The man adjusted his coat and turned, heading back up the slope. She looked at the key in her palm, then at her children, then at the empty road and the low sky. She said nothing, but she followed. The ride was silent, but the wagon rocked gently over the frozen trail, wheels creaking with every dip. She sat near the back with the baby cradled in her lap, while the rest huddled beneath spare coats the man had handed over without comment. Her boy Thomas walked beside the wheel in boots too thin for this kind of snow, but he made no sound of complaint. Hunger had quieted them all long ago. The man sat up front with the reins in gloved hands, his profile hardened against the white blur of the valley. He hadn't asked her name, and she hadn't asked his. Names felt too much like permanence, and permanence was for people who expected to stay. They reached the cabin just before dusk, a small structure tucked beneath bare cottonwoods, its roof heavy with snow and smoke curling steady from the chimney. One window glowed with lamplight. The sight of it struck something in her chest, something sore and tender, and almost too much to bear. He climbed down first, tied the horses, then opened the door without ceremony. "You first," he said, not looking at her. Inside it was warm. Not cozy, not pretty, but genuinely warm. A black stove hummed in the center of the room, and the air smelled faintly of pine pitch and old coffee. There was a table, hooks near the door, and 2 small rooms off the main one. A cot had been pulled near the stove with wool blankets folded neat at the end. "This was my mother's place," he said. "She passed a year back. I ain't been here much since." The woman turned toward him, the baby still in her arms, and asked the question that mattered most. "Why now?" He pulled his hat off and ran a hand through hair too long at the collar. "Because I seen you out there last night," he said. That was all. No grand speech, no conditions, just a simple truth that he'd seen suffering and couldn't walk away from it. She bathed the baby in a tin basin by the stove at night, her hand shaking as she wiped behind his ears, and hummed under her breath. She hadn't sung in months. Her voice was thin and unsure, but the baby smiled, a real smile, and that nearly undid her completely. The man sat by the fire working a length of rope into a loop, undoing it, then starting again. He didn't stare and didn't offer pity. He just stayed in the room with them, and somehow that was enough. Over the next few days, she learned the place by touch. There was a shed out back stacked with wood, a chicken coop half frozen but still sheltering 3 hens, and a creek down the slope that hadn't yet frozen over. He kept a journal filled with notes about weather and livestock and names of places she'd never heard. When he handed it over without a word, she found herself understanding him through those pages in ways conversation hadn't allowed. She began rising before the sun, stirring flour with cold fingers, feeding the stove until it roared. She boiled potatoes, salted beans, peeled onions until her eyes burned. It felt like nothing and everything at once, a return to something she hadn't known she missed. He brought home a bag of oats one morning and left it by the door. She thanked him. He only nodded. Later that day, she watched from the window as he cut wood, his shoulders moving slow and steady with each swing of the axe. Snow clung to his beard and his breath smoked in the air. He didn't look up, but she had the feeling he knew she was watching. That evening he spoke for the first time about something personal. "You got people?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not anymore." "Me neither," he said. It wasn't the start of a conversation, just the sharing of a truth that connected them in their aloneness. They didn't talk much after that, but she began to know the sound of his boots outside before he reached the door. She began to recognize the way he cleared his throat when he meant to speak but changed his mind. She began to trust that he would return, and that trust was something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. One night as she folded blankets near the fire, he asked a question that hung in the air like smoke. "You fixing to stay a while?" She didn't answer, not because she didn't know, but because saying yes felt like too much weight to carry. She kept folding. He let her. Outside the wind rose up, and snow whispered against the glass like a promise neither of them dared to name yet. But in that silence, something was building between them, brick by quiet brick, something that would prove stronger than either of them had ever known before.